Seraphine's bridal veil lay burning in the hearth when the Wolf Lord's carriage arrived. The ivory lace curled into black threads, filling the chamber with bitter smoke, while iron-rimmed wheels ground against the gravel below. I stood beside the empty wedding gown, clutching the note my sister had pinned to its bodice. I will not marry a bloodthirsty beast. By the time you read this, I will be beyond father's reach. The Blackmoor escort is at the gate, my father said behind me. His ceremonial coat hung crookedly from his shoulders. If they learn she fled, our house will be charged with breaking the pact. A church bell struck once outside. The sound shivered through the window panes. What will they do? I asked. He looked at the portrait of Seraphine rather than at me. The pact bears our seal. Betrayal is punishable by death. His fingers closed around the silver chain of office at his throat. Mine first, then everyone who helped her. The gown smelled of rosewater and hot ash when I lifted it. Seraphine was taller, so its satin hem pulled around my bare feet. Send a rider after her, father whispered. There isn't time. I set her note over the candle flame. The paper browned, flared, and vanished between my fingers. Elara. He said my name as though it were something already lost. Lord Ronan will know. Not before the pact is honored. You have heard the stories. His voice dropped beneath the clatter of horses. Blackmoor calls him the Wolf Lord because no enemy survives his wrath. They say his beast can scent a lie. A maid pulled the laces tight across my back. The boning pressed against my ribs, and the borrowed pearls felt cold against my throat. In the mirror, Seraphine's veil blurred my face into someone pale and unfinished. Then I won't lie unless he asks me who I am. Father caught my wrist. If you enter his territory wearing that dress, Blackmoor may never let you leave. I removed his hand and placed it over the family seal stitched into my glove. If no bride enters that carriage, none of us may have a home left to return to. Before we continue, where are you watching from? Drop your city or country in the comments below. And if you believe in courage and destiny, hit like and subscribe. These stories remind us, love finds the broken. Now, back to Elara. The front doors opened, admitting a blade of winter air and the scent of pine from the mountain road. For Blackmoor guards waited beside a carriage lacquered as dark as moonless water. Silver wolves had been carved into its doors, their eyes set with smoky quartz. None of the guards asked to see my face. The tallest merely bowed. The Wolf Lord awaits his bride before moonrise. Father's breath caught behind me. I descended the stone steps before he could call me back. Each pearl on the gown clicked softly against the next. At the carriage door, I glanced once toward the eastern woods where Seraphine had fled. Then I climbed inside and pulled the veil over my face with my own hands. The latch shut. Home disappeared behind black curtains, and the wheels began carrying the wrong sister toward the one man no disguise was supposed to fool. Moonlight poured through the open roof of Blackmoor's chapel, turning the stone altar silver and frosting every breath in the mountain air. Elara stood beneath it with cold seeping through the satin soles of her slippers. Across from her waited Ronan. The Wolf Lord wore no crown, only a black ceremonial coat fastened at the throat with an iron wolf. Firelight caught in his dark hair and along the pale scar crossing one brow. The painted portrait had made him look cruel. It had failed to capture the terrible stillness of a predator who needed no movement to command a room. Lift the veil, the officiant said. Elara's fingers tightened around the white roses. Before she could obey, Ronan reached for the lace himself. His knuckles brushed her temple as he drew it back, slowly enough that the fabric whispered against her skin. His gray eyes found her face, then stopped. No pleased surprise softened them. No uncertainty clouded them. Recognition landed between them like a drawn blade. He knew. Ronan had studied Seraphine's portrait, the high cheekbones, the golden hair, the small crescent birthmark beneath her left eye. The woman before him had chestnut curls pinned too tightly, a faint freckle beside her mouth, and eyes that held his stare despite the pulse fluttering at her throat. Elara waited for him to summon the guards. One word from him would expose the substitution and condemn her house before every witness in the chapel. Instead, he leaned close enough for cedar, winter smoke, and something wild to fill her next breath. Deep inside Ronan, the wolf that had clawed against his control since boyhood became silent. Not restrained, not defeated, calm. Her scent carried rain-soaked lavender and candle wax, but beneath both ran a warmth his beast recognized before his mind could name it. The constant pressure behind his ribs eased. His hands stopped aching from the shift he had spent the entire evening suppressing. For the first time in years, there was no growl inside his skull. Only watchful peace. Ronan's gaze sharpened. Elara mistook it for anger and lowered her voice. "My lord, not here." His answer was quiet enough to belong only to her. The officiant glanced between them, fingers hovering above the ceremonial chain. Around the altar, nobles shifted against carved oak benches. Fur collars rustled. Somewhere beyond the chapel walls, a wolf called from the snowy ridge. "Do you accept the bride delivered under her family's seal?" the officiant asked. Ronan could end the deception. He could preserve the authority Blackmoor feared and force the truth into the open. Instead, he took Elara's trembling hand. Heat moved through his palm, immediate and inexplicable. His wolf settled deeper. "I accept her," he said. The chain was wound once around their joined wrists, its iron links cold against Elara's skin. They drank from the same silver cup. Ronan spoke the binding vow without looking away from the woman whose name no one had yet given him. When the officiant pronounced the marriage sealed beneath the moon, murmurs rolled through the chapel. Ronan released her hand only after the final bell sounded. Then he offered his arm and led her down the aisle, choosing the pace, denying every witness the chance to question the pause at the altar. At the chapel doors, he bent toward her beneath the roar of the bells. "The woman in the portrait had blue eyes," he said. Elara's step faltered. His arm remained firm beneath her hand. "Smile," Ronan ordered softly as the doors opened upon the waiting court. "You are my wife before Blackmoor now. Before dawn, you will tell me whose wife I have made you." Silver goblets trembled as the banquet doors thundered shut behind the newlyweds. Firelight slid across Blackmoor's vaulted hall, catching on iron chandeliers, polished fangs, and the ceremonial chain still looped around Ronan's wrist. At his side, Elara entered beneath 100 measuring stairs. The air smelled of roasted venison, pine smoke, and wet fur carried in from the courtyard. No one challenged the bride aloud. Not yet. Ronan led her to the raised table, then withdrew his arm. "Before dawn," he murmured. "The truth." Elara lowered herself into the chair beside his, the stiff embroidery of Seraphine's gown pressing against her ribs. "You will have it." Music began, low and rough, while servants moved between the tables. Elara touched neither food nor wine. Across the hall, an Omega boy no older than 12 struggled beneath a silver pitcher. His sleeves were too long, his hands red from the cold, and each time a courtier snapped his fingers, the child flinched before hurrying faster. Ronan noticed Elara watching. "Blackmoor rewards order," he said, "and punishes weakness." Her question was quiet. His amber eyes narrowed, but before he could answer, a nobleman shoved his cup toward the boy without looking. The child turned too quickly. His heel caught on the edge of a wolfskin rug. Wine spilled across the white tablecloth and splashed down the nobleman's sleeve. Music faltered. The pitcher struck the stone with a ringing clang. The boy dropped to his knees. "Forgive me." A broad-shouldered steward strode forward, his keys rattling against his belt. An Omega who wastes the Lord's wine answers for it. He seized the boy by the collar and raised a narrow leather strap. No one moved. Elara did. Her chair scraped sharply across the floor. She crossed the space before the steward's arm could fall and caught his wrist in both hands. The leather stopped inches above the child's shoulder. A collective breath swept through the hall. The steward stared at her lace-covered fingers as if she had placed them on a blade. "Release me, my lady." "Release him first." His grip tightened on the boy. "You do not know our law." "I know." He fell. Elara's pulse hammered against the steward's wrist, but her voice held. "And I know a grown man does not need a weapon to correct a frightened child." Several courtiers rose. Chairs groaned over stone. The steward looked toward Ronan, waiting for permission to tear free. Ronan remained at the high table, motionless except for the slow curl of his fingers around his goblet. His inner wolf should have surged at the public defiance. Instead, lavender and rain reached him through the smoke, and the beast went still to listen. "The bride insults Blackmoor's order," an elder called. "The bride prevents cruelty," Elara answered without turning. That cost her the room. Disapproval sharpened into open hostility. Whispers crawled along the tables, naming her soft, foreign, unfit. Elara removed the strap from the steward's hand and laid it on the wine-soaked cloth. Then she knelt, lifted the fallen pitcher, and offered her hand to the boy. He hesitated until Ronan's voice crossed the hall. "Stand." The boy obeyed. Ronan descended from the dais, each footstep silencing another whisper. He stopped beside Elara and regarded the steward. "You raised punishment without asking whether harm was intended. The hierarchy is mine to enforce." Ronan took the strap from the table and snapped it once between his hands. The sound cracked through the hall. The boy returns to the kitchens. Unharmed, the steward bowed and retreated. Elara released a breath, but Ronan turned to her before relief could soften her posture. "You crossed my hall and countermanded my servant before my entire court." "Yes, knowing they may never accept you now?" Her fingers closed around the damp silver pitcher. "If acceptance requires silence, I can live without it." Something shifted in Ronan's gaze, not forgiveness and not surrender. Recognition. He faced the watching court and placed his goblet in Elara's hand. In one gesture, the woman they had condemned was made responsible for serving the Wolf Lord himself. "Then let Blackmoor learn," he said, "that my wife does not remain silent." The court bowed because Ronan was watching, but the elders did not. Their cold eyes settled on the unfamiliar bride, and Elara understood that before she could confess her name, Blackmoor had already begun deciding whether she deserved to keep his. A brass seal struck the council table with a crack that silenced the hall. Candle flames bent in the draught, carrying the bitter scent of melted wax through the stone chamber. Elara stood beside Ronan beneath narrow windows silvered by the fading moon, her borrowed gown cold against her skin. On the table lay the marriage contract, its ribbon cut open. "The bride named in this document is Seraphine," an elder said. His thumb pressed the rose-shaped imprint at the bottom. "The woman before us bears neither her face nor her name." Ronan's chair scraped across the floor. "She spoke the vows. I accepted them, under a stolen identity." The elder lifted the parchment so every council member could see. "Blackmoor law recognizes consent, but not fraud. The marriage is invalid." The ceremonial chain around Elara's wrist suddenly felt heavier than iron. Its links whispered as she stepped forward. Ronan's hand closed around her forearm, warm and firm. "You owe them nothing until I have questioned you. I owe you the truth." Elara unfastened the chain herself and laid it beside the contract. The small sound of silver touching oak traveled through the chamber. "My name is Elara." Seraphine fled before the escort arrived. A murmur moved among the elders like wind through dead leaves. Ronan did not release her. His fingers tightened once, though his face remained still. "Did your father plan the substitution?" "No," the answer came cleanly. "I chose it. To deceive Blackmoor," the elder said. "To prevent bloodshed." Elara held his gaze. "Your treaty makes a broken bridal pact an act of rebellion. My father would have been executed, and anyone accused of helping Seraphine would have followed him. Then he remains liable." A guard near the door shifted, leather creaking over chainmail. "Unless the guilty party is surrendered." Elara drew her arm from Ronan's grasp. This time he let her. "I surrender." The room went still enough for her to hear rain ticking against the high windows. Ronan turned sharply. "No, the choice was mine." She faced the elders before her courage could become another lie. "My father did not put me in that carriage. I entered it willingly. If your law requires a prisoner, take the woman who crossed your border under the veil." Two guards approached, but Ronan moved between them and Elara. Heat rolled from him, sharp with pine and the wild animal held beneath his skin. A low growl vibrated through the table. "Touch her without my command, and this council ends differently." The eldest councilman did not retreat. "Defend an unlawful bride as your wife, and you reject the authority that keeps the packs united. The border elders will call it tyranny. They will answer with war." Beyond the doors, armored boots shifted in uneasy rhythm. Ronan could stop the guards. Elara saw that plainly. He could break the table, scatter the council, and carry her from the chamber before anyone dared breathe. But Blackmoor would pay for every step. She moved around him and extended her hands to the guards. "A cell," she said. "Not my father's grave." Cold iron closed around her wrists. Ronan's eyes flashed gold, yet he did not strike. That restraint cost him more than rage would have. As the guards led Elara toward the torchlit corridor, the elder gathered the invalid contract and delivered the council's judgment. At sunset, Wolf Lord, you will choose, surrender the false bride for sentencing, or claim her against your own pacts. The doors shut between them, leaving Ronan with a broken treaty, an empty chain, and one day to decide whether the woman he had married was worth a civil war. The last stroke before sunset rolled from Blackmoor's iron bell, low enough to tremble through the council chamber floor. Beyond the narrow windows, red light spilled across the snow, while wind pressed a cold howl against the glass. Elara stood between two guards, the shackles gone but their bruised circles still visible around her wrists. Across the chamber, Ronan laid the bridal contract on the table. Beside it rested the dowry ledger, silver, grain, and 3 fertile valleys promised to Blackmoor in exchange for the marriage. "Release her," he said. An elder's carved ring clicked against the oak. The council offered 2 choices: surrender the impostor, or claim her as your wife against the pacts. Ronan's gaze settled on Elara. Torchlight sharpened the gold at the edges of his eyes, yet his voice remained quiet. "You offered choices built on a lie. She will be neither prisoner nor bargaining piece." He tore his signet from the scarlet wax beneath the dowry terms. The seal split with a brittle snap. A murmur swept through the chamber. By breaking it, Ronan surrendered every acre, every shipment, every advantage the bridal alliance had promised. Elara took one step forward. "My father will call this an insult. It is not his honor I am protecting." Ronan turned to the assembled court. "Elara remains in Blackmoor as my honored guest, under my protection and free to leave by her own will. No cell, no sentence, no claim she has not chosen." The words left no chain around her, not even one forged from gratitude. That cut deeper than possession would have. Elara's fingers closed over the empty space where the irons had been. "You gain nothing by keeping me." "I keep my word," Ronan replied. "The one I gave to the woman standing before me." Heavy boots sounded outside. The doors opened, carrying in the smell of horse sweat, snow, and wood smoke. 2 border envoys entered wearing travel-stained cloaks. Neither bowed. One removed a black wolf pin from his collar and placed it beside the ruined dowry seal. "The Frostpine and Red Hollow packs withdraw their warriors from your command," he announced. "They will not defend a lord who chooses a fraudulent bride over pack law." Silence tightened around the room. Those packs guarded Blackmoor's northern passes. Without them, hundreds of miles of border lay exposed. The second envoy unrolled a narrow field report. Wedding gleamed in the firelight. Enemy fires were sighted beyond the ridge. "More before nightfall. They know our lines have broken." The elders watched Ronan, waiting for regret to bend his shoulders. It never came. He crossed to Elara and placed the guest key in her palm instead of fastening another chain around her wrist. The iron was warm from his hand. "Your room is yours. The gates are open to you." Elara looked from the key to the troop markers being removed from Blackmoor's map. Ronan had not saved an agreement. He had chosen a woman who could still walk away, and paid for that freedom with the strength of his borders. Beyond the windows, another enemy fire appeared beneath the darkening sky. Then another. Ronan faced the map as the chamber doors slammed behind the departing envoys. "Prepare the northern wall," he ordered. By choosing Elara freely, he had given his enemies the opening they had been waiting for. Now Blackmoor would discover whether the woman he refused to imprison would remain when staying offered her nothing but war. Cold wind drove smoke beneath the northern windows, carrying the bitter scent of pine from the enemy fires. Somewhere beyond the stone walls, hammers struck iron in a relentless rhythm as Blackmoor armed for war. Elara stood alone in the guest chamber, the key Ronan had given her resting beside an unopened traveling cloak. The gates were still open. A horse waited in the lower courtyard. Then something scraped beneath the door. A sealed packet slid across the flagstones, pushed inside by a messenger who vanished before she reached the corridor. Her father's crest gleamed in dark red wax. Elara broke it with her thumbnail. 2 documents fell into her hands. The first was a letter addressed to Blackmoor's enemies, written 3 weeks before Seraphine fled. Her father had promised them an unguarded northern passage on the night after the wedding. The second was a military map marked with hidden trails through Frostpine territory and a narrow ravine behind Blackmoor's wall. At the bottom, one sentence had been added in her father's hand. "The younger daughter will preserve our name by taking the blame." Candlelight trembled across the ink. He had known the attack was coming. Seraphine's escape had not ruined his plan. It had only changed which daughter he sacrificed to it. Footsteps approached. Elara folded the map beneath her sleeve and held the letter over the flame. That seal could clear your family before every pack, Ronan said from the doorway. Rain silvered his black hair, and cold air followed him into the chamber. It proves your father arranged the deception. Elara watched fire crawl across the signature. It would clear his name of cowardice by proving him a traitor. The parchment curled, blackened, and dropped into the brazier. With it went the last proof that she had been used rather than willingly dishonoring the pact. Ash lifted between them like gray snow. Ronan crossed the room, but did not reach for the remaining paper. If you burn every road home, I will not pretend Blackmoor can replace it. I'm not asking it to. Elara drew out the map and spread it across the table. The parchment smelled of dust and sealing oil. Her finger traced a faint line through the northern hills, past the positions Blackmoor's scouts were watching. Your enemies won't attack the wall. They'll enter through Greyfong Ravine before dawn and open the western gate from inside. Ronan's gaze sharpened. How many? Enough that the border packs were never meant to save you. She pointed to 3 coated marks near the ravine. Those are supply columns. If you move your archers here and collapse this bridge, their army will be trapped below the ridge. Outside, a warning horn sounded once, then twice. Ronan covered her hand with his, not as lord claiming bride, but as commander accepting truth from the only person who had chosen to give it. The strange stillness between them returned, warm beneath his palm despite the freezing room. This map saves Blackmoor, he said, and condemns you in your father's lands. Elara closed his fingers around it. Then make the cost matter. Ronan turned toward the war chamber, already calling for his captains. Elara took the guest key from the table and laid it beside the burning letter. The open gate had offered her safety. She had answered by destroying the only evidence that could ever lead her home with honor. Before Ronan reached the doorway, another horn cried from the northern tower, 3 sharp notes this time. The enemy had entered Greyfong Ravine early. He looked back. Elara was already fastening her cloak. Tell me where you need me, she said. The ceremonial chain began to move before anyone touched it. Silver links scraped across the war table, ringing softly beneath the thunder of boots in the courtyard. Torchlight shivered over the ancient runes cut into every link, and the air smelled of hot wax, steel, and the first snow blowing through the open arrow slits. The officiant stepped from the doorway, pale beneath his moon-gray hood. 2 Blackmoor elders followed him, carrying the marriage ledger between them. Elara stood beside Ronan's map with her cloak fastened and one hand resting over Greyfong Ravine. The Western companies need that warning now. They have it, Ronan said. His gaze remained fixed on the chain. It slid another inch toward Elara. The officiant opened the ledger. Its brittle pages crackled like dry leaves. The council ordered me to examine the original vow before sentencing the false bride. I refused until tonight. One elder's jaw tightened. Enemy forces are inside the ravine. We have no time for dead words. Then we have no time to defend a lie. The officiant set a candle beside the oldest entry. Heat awakened faded silver lettering across the page, revealing a sentence buried beneath generations of ceremonial ink. He read it aloud. Blackmoor shall be joined to the daughter who crosses the wolf gate of her own will and accepts its lord beneath the moon. Silence swallowed the chamber. There was no name, no mention of the eldest daughter, no Seraphine. One elder seized the ledger, turning pages with stiff fingers. The contract bears Seraphine's seal. A political edition, the officiant answered. Not the binding vow. Ronan moved first. He crossed the cold stone floor and stopped before Elara, close enough that she felt the warmth of him through her gloves. Seraphine fled before reaching our gate, he said. You crossed it willingly. Elara looked toward the courtyard, where horns called soldiers to the walls. I crossed it to prevent an execution. I wore another woman's gown. I spoke another woman's name. But no one carried you through. His voice dropped beneath the clamor outside. No one forced your feet. The elder slammed the ledger shut. A technicality cannot choose Blackmoor's Luna. Ronan did not look away from Elara, then let the vow answer. He removed his glove and offered his hand, palm upward. Not an order, not a claim. A choice. Elara could hear the chain whispering over wood. She could smell smoke clinging to her sleeves from the letter she had burned. Beyond the walls waited the army her father had helped guide here. Behind her lay a road that no longer led home. She placed her bare hand in Ronan's. Heat flashed between their palms. The torches bent inward as if pulled by a sudden breath, and the silver chain lifted from the table. Light raced through its runes, crossed Ronan's wrist, and curled around Elara's skin in the shape of a pale crescent threaded with a wolf's crown. Ronan's breath caught. Gold burned through his dark eyes, yet the power in the room did not turn savage. It settled. The same impossible stillness that had found him at the altar now spread through the chamber, deep and warm as a heartbeat under snow. "Mate," the officiant whispered. The word struck harder than the war horns. One elder stepped back. The other lowered the ledger, his authority suddenly weightless in his hands. Elara stared at the luminous mark. She had entered Blackmoor believing herself a substitute offered to a monster. The ancient vow had recognized no substitute at all. Ronan closed his fingers around hers carefully. "You were never the woman chosen by a contract," he said. "You are the woman the vow accepted." A horn screamed from the western tower. Then another answered, closer. The floor trembled beneath running soldiers. Elara lifted her eyes to his as the mark between them brightened. "If this bond is real, the council will demand you claim it before battle." "They will." Ronan turned toward the elders without releasing her hand. "And our enemies will use it if we hesitate." For the first time, the council waited on Elara rather than judging her. Outside, the western gate bell began to toll. Elara tightened her grip around Ronan's hand. "Then no one decides what this bond means except us." The western gate bell struck again, each iron note shivering through the moonlit hall. Cold air poured through the open doors, carrying pine smoke, wet stone, and the distant thunder of marching feet. Elara released Ronan's hand, not to retreat, but to step between him and the waiting elders. The crescent in-crown mark burned silver against her wrist. "No claiming ceremony," she said. A murmur swept beneath the vaulted rafters. One elder tightened his grip on his staff. "The bond must be sealed before the Wolf Lord enters battle. Blackmoor requires certainty. Then Blackmoor will have ours." Elara faced Ronan. Torchlight caught the exhaustion beneath his eyes and the dark dust on his ceremonial coat. But not because an ancient vow commands it. Another horn cut through the night. Soldiers rushed across the courtyard outside, boots striking flagstones slick with mist. Ronan watched her without reaching for her again. "The gates remain open," he said quietly. "You may still leave. Riders can take you south before the ravine falls." The offer landed harder than any order. He was giving her the freedom he had already paid for. Now, when keeping her would strengthen his rule, and losing her might fracture it. Elara drew the guest key from her pocket. Its iron teeth felt cold against her palm. She placed it on the altar beside the ceremonial chain. "I already chose not to use this." Then she lifted Seraphine's bridal veil from her hair. The fine lace whispered over her shoulders before settling across the marriage contract that bore another woman's name. "I crossed your gate wearing my sister's gown. I stood beside you to pay my family's debt. That choice ends here." Ronan's jaw tightened, but he did not interrupt. Elara tore one narrow strip from the veil. The sound was small beneath the bells, yet every elder heard it. She wrapped the lace around Ronan's wrist, then tied the other end around her own, leaving their hands unbound and their palms free. "This choice is mine." Heat moved through the mark. Silver light traveled along the lace, not like a chain closing, but like moonlight finding a road. Ronan turned to the officiant. "Does any law forbid a lord from accepting the woman who freely accepts him?" The officiant looked at the glowing bond. "None." Ronan removed the black signet of his office. Without it, his hand looked less like a ruler's and more like the hand that had held hers carefully when the world called her false. He set the ring beside the key. "Then hear me without crown or contract. Elara, I choose you, not as payment, not as proof, and not because Blackmoor needs an heir. I choose you even if Dawn leaves me no throne to offer." The elders stirred sharply. A command from outside announced that enemy scouts had reached the western causeway. Ronan had surrendered more than certainty now. He had placed his succession, his authority, and the future of Blackmoor beneath her answer. Elara stepped closer until the cold between them disappeared. "And I choose you without believing I can tame your wolf or save your kingdom alone," she said. "I choose the man who opened the door when keeping me would have been easier." She pressed her marked wrist to his. The bond flared once, bright enough to pale every torch in the hall. Ronan's eyes flashed silver, but no growl followed. His breath slowed beneath her touch. "Witness it," the officiant declared. "They have chosen what fate only revealed." Ronan reclaimed his signet, turned toward the courtyard, and called for the Western companies to assemble. Elara moved with him. At the threshold, he stopped. "Beyond that door, you will not be sheltered." "Good," she answered, tightening the lace between their wrists. "I'm not walking behind you." The portcullis began to rise, flooding the hall with freezing wind and the orange glare of enemy fires. Ronan drew his sword. Elara took the battle map from the waiting guard. Together they crossed into the courtyard, bound by choice, with an army watching to see whether its lord's chosen mate could help save Blackmoor before sunrise. Orange fire rolled beyond the causeway, staining the snow like dawn arriving too early. Horns answered from Blackmoor's towers, their low cries vibrating through stone, armor, and bone. Elara spread the battle map across a frost-silvered table while Ronan's soldiers waited around her, their breath clouding the bitter air. "Greyfong Ravine is bait," she said, pinning one corner beneath a dagger. "They expect you to seal it and leave the western gate thin." One elder scoffed. "And we should entrust Blackmoor to a counterfeit bride?" Ronan's sword struck the table with a clean metallic crack. "You will listen to my mate." But Elara untied the lace from his wrist. For one heartbeat, silence swallowed the courtyard. Then she wrapped it around the map's western edge. "They know the route because my father gave it to them," she said. "So they will trust his timing. Let them." Her finger traced a narrow switchback above the ravine. She ordered the western companies to extinguish their torches and hide behind the inner wall, then sent empty wagons toward Greyfong with lanterns swinging from their axles. From the enemy ridge, it would look as though Blackmoor's defenders were abandoning the gate. Ronan studied the moving lights, then looked at her. No command passed between them. None was needed. He turned to his warriors. "Follow her signal." Minutes later, enemy scouts surged onto the causeway, drawn by the false retreat. Ice cracked beneath hurried boots. When the final rider crossed the boundary stone, Elara raised Seraphine's discarded veil, its white silk snapping in the wind, and dropped it into the brazier. Blue flame climbed the fabric. Blackmoor's archers rose behind the wall as Ronan's hidden companies closed the road from both sides. Steel rang, wolves roared, and smoke carried the sharp scent of pine across the courtyard. But the trap ended the assault before sunrise. The enemy banners withdrew into the northern dark. No western gate opened for them. When the last horn fell silent, the Frostpine envoy entered through the portcullis with his warriors behind him. He removed his gauntlet and knelt, not to Ronan, but to Elara. "Frostpine withdrew from a contract," he said. "We did not withdraw from the woman who saved our border." One by one, the Blackmoor elders lowered their heads. Ronan stepped before them, bloodless sword still in hand, and removed the iron circlet from his brow. "I chose Elara without land, dowry, or permission," he said. "If that makes me unworthy of this throne, take it now." Cold wind moved through the assembled ranks. No elder reached for the crown. The officiant lifted it instead and placed it in Elara's hands. She did not set it upon Ronan's head immediately. First, she unfastened the bridal chain bearing Seraphine's seal and laid it in the melted snow. Then she touched the crescent and crown mark at her wrist to Ronan's scarred hand. Warm silver light flowed between them, gentle enough to quiet every wolf in the courtyard. "I did not cross your gate for a crown," she whispered. "I know," Ronan answered. "That is why Blackmoor will trust you with one." Elara returned the circlet to him, and Ronan raised her hand before the watching packs. No borrowed name was proclaimed. No compulsory claim was spoken. The Omega boy began the cheer, his small voice breaking the stillness, and hundreds joined him until the towers shook. Beneath the first pale light of morning, Ronan bent his forehead to hers, not as a lord receiving what a treaty had promised, but as a man honoring the woman who had freely remained. Elara had entered Blackmoor wearing another bride's veil. She stood at its heart beneath her own name, beside the alpha who had chosen her freedom before asking for her love.